On a dusty battlefield outside the gates of Troy, two warriors stepped forward, each carrying the pride of an entire nation on their shoulders. One was the greatest fighter the world had ever seen. The other was the only man brave enough to face him. And in the silence before their blades clashed, history took a breath. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back.
Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, had a habit of forcing smaller kingdoms under his rule. He would show up at their borders, demand a fight, and make the same offer every time. If he won, they belonged to him. If they won against him, which rarely ever happened, they could go home free. This time, his sights were on Thessaly. After camping on their land for days, King Triopas, afraid of war, asked that instead of doing it the old way, each side would bring its best fighter to engage in a duel, and the winner would decide the fate of both nations. Agamemnon agreed, and once again walked away victorious thanks to Achilles, a man whose name alone made strong warriors tremble. While that was happening, Princes Hector and Paris of Troy were in Sparta, seated at King Menelaus' banquet table as honored guests and peace ambassadors to their home nation. The banquet was lively, but not for Paris, who had something else on his mind. For a while, he had been in love with Helen, Menelaus' wife. So, that night, when the banquet reached its climax and people were distracted, he quietly slipped away to see her, and in her room begged her to return with him to Troy, which she blindly agreed to. By dawn the next day, Paris sneaked her onto Hector's ship, unaware that a fisherman had seen them leave. When Hector found out, he was furious, but the ship was already too far out to turn back. Plus, he didn't want to risk facing Menelaus with his few men, so they continued their journey to Troy, back in Sparta. It didn't take long for Menelaus to discover that Helen was gone. When Menelaus heard from the fisherman that she had left with the people of Troy, he swore to take his revenge. Blinded by rage, he turned to the one person he knew would stand with him no matter what, his brother, Agamemnon. Upon hearing his plight, Agamemnon agreed without hesitation, not because he cared about Helen, but because conquering the city of Troy had been his lifelong dream, and Paris had just handed him the perfect excuse. Immediately, Agamemnon started drawing up plans, but one thing held him back. To win this war, he needed Achilles. No matter how many armies Agamemnon commanded, he knew no warrior could match Achilles on the battlefield. But the problem was, Achilles wasn't his soldier. In fact, he wasn't anyone's soldier. He fought only when he wanted to, answered to no king, and made no effort to hide his disdain for Agamemnon's leadership, since Agamemnon knew Achilles would never listen to him directly. He reached out to the one person Achilles actually respected, Odysseus, one of the kings under his command. If anyone could convince Achilles to join the war, it was him. Odysseus found Achilles outside, locked in a light sparring session with his young cousin, Patroclus. The boy moved with such excitement that it was clear he wanted to officially begin fighting alongside Achilles. Achilles noticed it, but he also knew the world wasn't kind to eager boys who ran toward battles they didn't understand. Even though Odysseus made a solid case for why Greece needed him, Achilles hesitated. He had never been scared of war, but something about this one didn't sit right. So before making any decision, he decided to consult his mother, who doubled as a priestess. When he saw her, she told him if he stayed home, he would live a long life, get married, raise children, grow old, and die surrounded by people who loved him. But if he went to Troy, his name would live for centuries. Songs would tell his story long after he was gone. But the price for this glory would be his life. He would never return from Troy, while Achilles wrestled with whether to go or not. Hector and Paris arrived at Troy safely. They, including Helen, received a warm welcome from King Priam, who was stunned by her beauty. Later that day, King Priam asked why Hector had allowed Paris to bring Helen back with them. He wondered if returning her alongside some expensive gifts could pacify Menelaus, but Hector, knowing how vengeful Menelaus could be, advised against it. Inside his chambers, Paris was already panicking. He feared that Menelaus would soon arrive at their gates, so he begged Helen to run away with him. But Helen knew Menelaus too well. If he reached Troy and didn't find her, he would burn the entire kingdom out of spite. That night, King Priam prayed to Apollo for protection, and by morning, preparations for war had already begun. Sacrifices were made at the temple, weapons were gathered, and the city braced itself. A few days later, the alarm echoed from the watchtower, as the guards had spotted a long line of ships approaching their shore. shores, Agamemnon had finally made his move, and he brought with him about 5,000 soldiers. Achilles, choosing glory over a long and peaceful life, came too, with his own fighters, the Myrmidons, and his cousin, Patroclus, ready to fight only on his own terms. The Myrmidons rowed faster than the rest of the Greeks, and they reached Troy's shores long before anyone else. They had barely stepped off their boats before Trojan archers rained arrows down on them. But once they touched the sand, it was over. They captured the beach in a twinkle of an eye and invaded the temple of Apollo, where they captured Briseis, a priestess, and Hector's cousin. Seeing what had happened, Hector rushed to the temple with his men in a desperate attempt to drive them back. Inside the temple, he came face to face with Achilles, and for a moment, it looked like the fight everyone feared was about to happen. But Achilles refused to engage him, and instead told Hector their fight deserved a larger audience, not a dark room with no witnesses. Then he let Hector walk away. After that, Achilles returned to camp with Briseis as his prize from the battle. But Agamemnon outsmarted him and took her for himself. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound Achilles had ever carried. Back in Troy, Paris met with his father, Priam, to discuss his plans. Since he was responsible for the bloodshed, he wanted to face Menelaus in a one-on-one battle. If he won, Helen would stay in Troy. If he lost, she would be returned. It was an audacious idea, and almost no one liked it. Not Priam, not Hector, and definitely not Helen. But his mind was made up. So King Priam placed the sword of Troy in his hands, even though every part of him feared how this would end. The next day, Agamemnon marched to Troy to confront Hector and the Trojan army. At the battlefield, Paris stepped forward and challenged Menelaus to a duel, just as he had promised to do. And the fight started with both armies watching in silence. Paris tried to stand his ground, but shortly into the fight, Menelaus overpowered him, and before long, he stumbled until he dropped to his knees and crawled toward Hector, who stepped forward and, without a second thought, killed Menelaus to save his brother. The death of Menelaus stung Agamemnon so much that he attacked back, but the armies of Troy, who were on standby, fought fiercely to the extent that Agamemnon and his forces were forced to retreat toward their ships. Feeling humiliated, Agamemnon turned to Odysseus and his council for advice, and was reminded again that without Achilles, Greece didn't stand a chance of winning. If he wanted victory, he had to earn Achilles' return, and the only way to achieve that was to give Briseis back to him. As soon as Achilles received the message, he stormed into the Greek camp, where Agamemnon's soldiers were tossing Briseis around like a toy, pulled her out of there, and took her to his tent. For the first time, his anger melted as he listened to her talk about the war and her fears. That little moment of vulnerability changed him, and by morning, he decided to return to Greece. Patroclus was displeased with this decision, as he had dreamed of fighting beside Achilles, so he came up with a plan. Back in Troy, Hector warned Priam to remain cautious. The Greeks had made the mistake of underestimating them, but he didn't want Troy to make the same mistake. However, General Glaucus disagreed and wanted to launch a strike, and High Priest Archeptolemus supported the move, claiming the gods favored Troy. Caught between these voices, Priam chose to trust his advisors and ordered an attack at dawn. At sunrise, the Trojan army, led by Hector, attacked the Greek camp. The Greek forces were still trying to gather momentum from the unexpected attack, but as soon as Achilles suddenly appeared in his full armor, their morale bounced back, and they pushed back with renewed strength. In the heat of the battle, Achilles fought his way toward Hector, and the two engaged in fierce combat until Hector slit his throat. In a twinkle of an eye, Achilles was on the ground, gasping for breath as the Myrmidons looked on in horror. To finalize what he'd done, Hector reached for the helmet only to discover that it was Patroclus. The realization hit Hector so hard he could barely breathe. Horrified at what he had done, he looked at Odysseus and quietly said they had fought enough for one day. Odysseus nodded and, with a heavy voice, told him that Patroclus wasn't just another soldier. He was Achilles' cousin. Those words carried so much weight, one that Hector would soon find out. With heavy hearts, the Myrmidons returned to tell Achilles what had just happened. Achilles wasn't happy that they had flouted his orders and gone to battle, but that unhappiness soon turned to fury when he asked after Patroclus, only to be told that he was killed in battle. Then Eutorus went further to explain how Patroclus had tricked them into battle by wearing Achilles' armor, moving like him and fighting like him. The words cut deeper than any blade and got Achilles so enraged that he struck Eutorus. Still grieving, Achilles gave his cousin a proper burial and made up his mind to avenge his death. Meanwhile, Agamemnon was happy with the turn of events, as he knew Achilles would not rest until he had had his revenge. At the first sign of sunrise, Achilles mounted his horse and, despite Briseis' pleas, rode straight for the gates of Troy. When he got there, he shouted Hector's name until the entire city heard him, and Hector himself came out. As soon as he was face to face with Hector, Achilles removed his helmet to avoid any mix-up. Priam and Paris watched from the walls while Andromache turned away, unable to witness the fight. When the duel started, it was brutal and merciless. Hector fought with everything he had, but Achilles fought like a wounded lion. And after a while, Achilles broke through Hector's defense, struck him in the chest, and killed him. Then he tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it back to the Greek camp. Troy was shattered by Hector's death. He wasn't just their prince, he was the strength of their entire army, and losing him felt like losing their shield. So that night, while Achilles was in his tent, feeling guilty for what he'd done and sad about his cousin's death, King Priam, disguised in a cloak, visited Achilles and begged for his son's body back so he could be given a proper burial. Despite being enemies, Achilles felt deeply sorry for him, stepped out, wept over Hector's body, and promised to meet him in the next life before giving him to Priam. King Priam followed him outside to retrieve his son's body, and just then, Briseis showed up. Since Achilles was still feeling sober, he allowed her to go home too and apologized for hurting her. He then gave Priam his word that the Greeks would not attack Troy for 12 days so they could properly mourn Hector's demise. When Agamemnon heard of Achilles' secret truce with Priam, he was livid. However, while thinking of a way out of the situation, Odysseus noticed a small wooden horse a soldier had carved for his son that sparked an idea that would help them put the 12 days of mourning to their advantage. For 12 days, the Greeks were completely silent. There was no smoke from their camp, no guards on the beach, nothing at all. Curious to know why everywhere was silent, the Trojans, led by their king, went down to see what was going on, only to find that the beach was empty, the ships were gone, and the only things left behind were a few dead Greek soldiers who looked like they had died from some kind of plague, and a huge wooden horse structure erected in the middle of the abandoned camp. Priam didn't know what to make of the wooden structure. He was advised by the high priest to bring it inside the city as a sign of victory, but Paris felt uneasy and begged him to burn it immediately. Priam, exhausted from the war, wanted to believe the suffering was finally over. So he ignored Paris's warning and allowed the horse into Troy, where it was celebrated as a symbol of victory. The people partied into the night, drinking, singing, laughing, and completely unaware that their doom was near. Meanwhile, one Trojan scout who went hiking along the cliffs during the celebration saw that the entire Greek fleet was still around and was hiding in a small cove, waiting to strike. But before he could turn back to warn the city that what they saw earlier was a decoy, he was struck down by an arrow. That night, after the people had tired out from the day's celebration and drifted off to sleep, the wooden horse slowly opened, and Odysseus, with a small group of soldiers, slipped out and unlocked the gates for the rest of the Greek army that had gathered outside. Though Achilles was with them, he came with a different motive. The night before, he had already told his men to get the ship ready and prepare to depart the next day. But after hearing of Agamemnon's plans, he changed his mind and decided to join them under the pretense that he had returned to fight, when in truth he came because he needed to rescue Briseis. The Greeks spread through the city, burning houses and killing anyone they saw. The attack was so sudden that the Trojan army was thrown off balance, and soon they were overpowered. Feeling helpless over what had happened, King Priam walked inside the palace only for Agamemnon to appear and stab him from behind. While the city burned, Achilles searched desperately for Briseis, hoping to get to her before other Greek soldiers or Agamemnon would. Meanwhile, Briseis was in the temple and was so deep in prayer that she didn't hear Agamemnon enter until he grabbed her by the neck and told her how he planned to take her back to Greece as his slave. While he was talking, Achilles reached the temple and charged toward them, but before he could get to them, Briseis stabbed Agamemnon in the neck with a knife she had hidden in her sleeves. Seeing what she had done, Agamemnon's soldiers grabbed her, but before they could do anything to her, Achilles got to them and killed them too. As he was helping her up, Paris arrived and, despite Briseis' pleas, shot an arrow through Achilles' heel. Achilles staggered and tried to raise his sword to aim at Paris, but this time, Paris shot him in the chest again and again until he succumbed to his injuries and finally fell to his knees. With his last strength, he told Briseis that she had been his peace in a lifetime full of war. Then he told her to go. With the help of Paris, Briseis escaped while Achilles watched, and as soon as she disappeared from sight, he fell and died. By the time the Greek soldiers reached him, it was too late. It is believed that he died from the injury to his heel. This is because after his birth, his mother dipped him into the river Styx to make him invincible, but the heel she held him by never touched the water, making it the only vulnerable part of his body. The next morning, the Greeks gave Achilles an honorable burial within the ruins of Troy, while the surviving Trojans set out on a journey in search of a new place to call home. If this story left you thinking and unsettled, consider smashing the subscribe button for more gripping movie recaps.